Today, I would like to speak to international students as a friend. Perhaps you have somebody that you are in a serious relationship with, or perhaps you are just being social trying to figure it out. The idea of marrying and getting a green card and then citizenship is very appealing. I am not discouraging a beautiful thing, and over 60% of home buyers in the US are married couples, but there are several things worth mentioning for you to consider. Hello, I'm Apu, an aspiring real estate investor developer in Brooklyn, New York City. I'm starting this YouTube channel to present myself, the knowledge that I've built up, and some about my experience in search of one or more partners to begin and grow with. I specifically speak to international folks, but of course, I am speaking to the American audience. If you see something extraordinary in me, reach out and we will see if there is a way to combine our talents for development or if you are a great fit to be a more passive investor. Anyways, I'll make an intro video about myself later on. So for today, back on topic. With a marriage-based immigration case, the same work you would be doing under OPT, optional practical training, may qualify you for a low down payment mortgage. You can also work in any other field to build savings, as the rules may differ on how long you would need to be working that job before being able to qualify that ongoing income. Make sure your lender knows what they are doing. I have heard the horror stories of underwriting misunderstandings for those without permanent status. Mortgages for a primary residence, which require the lender to have confidence that the loan will be paid in the future, have a much lower down payment requirement and better interest rates. Part of that includes, for example, FHA loans for move-in ready or major rehab work required, only 3.5% down. Your intention must be to live in part of the property for at least a year. One of the most impactful differences between the family-based green card from other popular routes among international students is that it is not attached to your field of study. In other words, you are not attached to your major or minor. You can work as many or as little hours as you want and maintain legal status depending on what works for you and your husband or wife. Think about transferable skills sets, things that you can still utilize what you learned in school even if you end up working in a different field than your degree. Choose which path works best for you, free of preconceived notions. For example, many people with skilled trades like construction workers out earn the average college graduate. And also being a business owner can be a great path to wealth with some knowledge needed that isn't taught in schools. Obviously, this is not a how-to guide. This is my opinion and I am not a lawyer. I am making overgeneralizations that I think put American life into context, but the conversations you have with your partner will be most relevant. Since I am not a lawyer, nor is this formal advice, I recommend consulting at least one that specifically does family immigration law. These consultations are usually low cost or free. You can consider hiring one to bring you through the entire process, or you can do it on your own. In the US immigration process and proceedings, you have the right to have a lawyer, but the government will not pay for it. If you truly need one and can't afford one, some volunteer their services. In criminal cases, so any time that somebody gets arrested by an agency besides ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, they have the right to a lawyer and the government will pay for one if the accused cannot afford one. Beware that many criminal defense lawyers do not understand the lasting immigration implications. For seemingly minor offenses, lawyers, especially the free government ones, encourage guilty pleas. For example, someone who has never been arrested before gets into a fight or shoplifts, they might be offered to have the charges dismissed or similar relief if they go to anger management and stay out of trouble for a year. This does not make the situation go away. Your immigration lawyer can work with your criminal lawyer to decide if fighting for your innocence or getting the case tossed out due to a technicality is best. I think you already know the importance of staying out of trouble and staying away from those who can get you into trouble, but a bad day can happen to anybody. Here are some definitions and terms that will give you more context to people watching this video. F1 is the visa international students are granted to enter the United States for full-time study. The length of permission to stay is usually granted for the duration of study. Study also includes OPT, which allows students to work for 1 to 3 years after graduation in the field they studied. While international students are in school, they are allowed to work part-time in many capacities on campus, so they qualify to get a Social Security number right away. Social Security numbers never expire and are also used for banking, credit, and tax purposes. Some tax credits, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, require everybody on the return to have an SSN, so getting one while you qualify for one is useful for getting the most benefit from filing a joint return with your spouse. Filing your return jointly is a big piece of evidence that immigration officials look at when determining if a marriage case is legitimate. Social Security itself is a retirement and disability plan almost all workers in the U.S. are required to pay into. Work study, along with railroad employees, are exempt to this for reasons that I cannot make any sense of. Since OPT is designed for international students to depart the United States after completing it, perhaps to utilize the skills they acquire to improve their home country instead of staying through to retirement, it is also exempt from Social Security and Medicare withholdings. I will note that workers on H-1B, which is a different option international students like to pursue to stay in the U.S., are required to pay into Social Security because the H-1B visa is dual intent in that workers are expected to apply for permanent residence but must leave the U.S. if it does not work out. So to explain a bit more, the F1 visa is for non-immigrant intent, meaning that international students must intend to depart the United States once their duration of study is over. The consulate, when issuing the visa, along with Customs and Border Protection agents at the airport, each time you enter the U.S., assess your intent. So the likelihood of a spouse of a U.S. citizen to be granted entry to the U.S. on a non-immigrant visa is low. Boyfriend-girlfriend relationships also cause suspicion. Once you are inside the U.S., you are allowed to change your mind. Given the amount of time that you plan to stay in the U.S., falling in love, getting married, and wanting to stay in the U.S. with your husband or wife is a perfectly reasonable thing to happen. But people who are admitted for a much shorter period of time are also allowed to apply for adjustment of status based on marriage to a U.S. citizen. During the adjustment of status process, you must stay inside the United States or your application will be considered abandoned, and your student visa will be useless because your immigrant intent has been filed. You would have to complete the entire process outside of the U.S. and then enter with an immigrant visa based on the marriage. You can apply for advanced parole when submitting your application for adjustment of status. I tell people to put that form in, but to only use it for a serious emergency, as there is a risk that your case could be denied while you are away. In short, from the moment you start seriously dating an American citizen until you receive a green card, leaving the U.S. carries the risk of not being let back in, and lying would make the situation much worse. When your case is approved, permanent resident is the immigration status that you will obtain, and a green card is the informal name of the ID card that you will carry. You will use that when re-entering the U.S. in place of a visa, and the card also proves your right to work in the United States. I want to give some perspective from my vantage point, but I believe it to be generally true on marriage. In American laws and culture, marriage is a full merger of two people's lives, and the immigration office will make sure of that to the maximal extent. I'll get back to the actual immigration process later. While it is possible that you will live with your partner's family while y'all establish yourselves. In general, U.S. married couples put each other first, take care of their children if any, and in large part leave their parents to fend for themselves. I say that in hopefully a more crude way than you will actually experience, because I know that in many cultures, taking care of the parents is viewed as very important. Americans expect elders to utilize their investments, pensions, and Social Security. If a family member is in poor health, someone might choose to take care of them personally instead of relying on a housekeeper, visiting nurse, or nursing homes, but that is the exception, not the norm. And having the parents move into the home that the adult children have established for themselves is avoided. Marriage is great for teamwork when both of you have goals financially, socially, health, and more, and you want to work on them together. In many ways, one spouse's signature gives protections or drawbacks for the other spouse. The most commonly cited example is when a house is purchased with only one spouse being on title or mortgage. In the event of divorce or death, the other has a claim to it. This is more complex legally than most people realize, so as the need arises over time, speak with estate planners. But the immigration process, the government will be looking to see that both spouses are listed on any major property. But having an emergency bank account where one person is the owner and the other is paid at death makes it easier for the surviving spouse to access that cash. Since this video is geared towards college-age students, the odds of one of you dying in the next 5 or even 20 years or more is very low. I wouldn't spend a disproportionate amount of time and energy thinking about that. But of course, tragedies do occur, so I think a little bit of planning is a good idea, especially if there is any reason that getting married will change the financial structure that either of y'all qualify for. Some find themselves struggling to find the necessary documents in that situation, so each of you should have your own digital copy. Things like having a business that needs to continue to operate or having children can make it more important than young people realize to plan for the worst. If your American spouse were to die before you secured your permanent residency, there is relief if you apply in time and don't get remarried before that whole process is finished. It's simpler and has less requirements than the typical marriage route, so if you do end up in such this unfortunate circumstance, I recommend contacting a lawyer promptly. The immigration office does not want to see contingencies in the event of divorce, and in fact, one of the forms that almost all jointly filed family petition cases require overrides a lot of divorce planning. To my next point, the nature of a situation where all assets and income are considered, quote, marital instead of separate, that's the legal terminology, is one of the core reasons that having a one-sided goal, like sending money back home to your family, will be a point of major contention if you are married to a fully American cultured person. If you think about it, your spouse wants to build a life of prosperity for both of y'all here in the United States and doesn't get anything out of sending money out of the country to a family that they barely know. A potential compromise, for example, would be to put both of your names on a house that you buy for your family. This way it remains unquestionably a marital property and alleviates the fear that you married just to get the green card with secret plans to go back to being single. If you are consistently seeing this as a major point of contention in your dating conversations on campus, I recommend spending time off campus and in the immigrant communities from your country or region. Especially if you are in or close to a major city, there are many events, churches, and clubs that will give you the opportunity to meet like-minded people who also have an attachment to investing in your home country. For Americans, marriage and having children are not as strongly linked than it is in many other cultures. A lot of people have children out of wedlock, and some get married without the goal of having children. Don't get me wrong, a lot of Americans do feel that people should get married before having children, but the shame around not doing so isn't really there anymore. Getting pregnant or getting somebody else pregnant is not an effective way to get them to want to marry you. An old-fashioned term for when families attempt to apply that pressure is a shotgun wedding, but that's not part of our culture anymore. The United States Constitution does ensure that anybody born in the United States, regardless of the immigration status of their partners, except for diplomats, is a citizen. And current U.S. law does give the option for children 21 years of age and up to petition for their parents for permanent residence. Anyway, all of that is to say the question of if to have children or not is something that needs to be discussed before marriage or really before having unprotected sex. Because you either have children or you don't. There's no real way to compromise on that. Options like choosing to adopt or foster care children only address a small portion of the concerns people have about raising kids. Adopting a child means that you are permanently taking on all of the responsibilities of being their parent, and fostering means that you are taking care of the children temporarily on behalf of and with compensation from the government. The parents or other family members of foster children can petition the court at any time, and if they convince the judge that they are now capable of raising their kids, they will get their kids back. A tougher but important conversation to have is what would you do if somebody close to you is unable to parent or dies? And if that worst case scenario were to happen, remember that moving the children in needs to be a joint decision, not something that is done out of emotion. Personally, I think it's best that newlywed couples spend a few years with each other before having children. It's kind of an extension of life as a single person, but now you're a duo. You can travel with little planning. Even within the US, there's a lot to see and experience. Without having to take care of anybody else, you can get drunk and stay up all night before chugging some Red Bull to head to work. Just don't make it a habit. Or you can have sex on the kitchen counter. Some couples have told me it took several years to get to the point where they weren't arguing with each other all the time. Others have said that they had to get the green card before they felt relieved enough to feel the connection on a deeper level with their American counterpart, saying that seeing the spouse hadn't left them after getting the green card solidified the relationship in their eyes. If you're just dating or engaged and dealing with any of those problems, you should strongly think about if y'all are best for each other and if now is the time to have the best chance at a successful marriage. If marriage is in your life goals, remember that no body or situation is perfect, and seeking that will get you nowhere. Overall, they all felt that love deepens with time, and being 5 or 10 years into marriage is better. But I can't tell you what's right for you. Many people prefer the marriage green card over employment routes because they want to be a stay-at-home parent. While most Americans find having a stay-at-home husband or wife is a luxury that they cannot afford, I have belief in immigrants that they can make enough money to accomplish reasonably expensive goals. In terms of sex life, not all couples pledge sexual exclusivity to each other, and personally, I don't think it's a good idea to have the pressure on one person to be your everything. Of the couples that are open sexually, most do so separately, but some are brave enough to be swingers or go to BDSM kink parties together. I think that is the best option for couples to do, or to just be exclusive with each other. because that avoids one person getting more action and the other person feeling they are not getting enough. I urge you to never give up on your sex life. But it's all for you to figure out. I bring this up because these are conversations to be had to avoid heartbreak. Views on money, not just spending habits, but what makes the best fit for the ways to make money, are also very important. I strongly recommend some of the writings from Robert Kiyosaki, particularly his book Cash Flow Quadrant. He is most famous for his first book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. According to him, there are four main ways that people make money, either as an E, an S, a B, or an I. E is for employee, with a job that pays on a regular schedule, thus is seen as the most stable, and issues the W-2 tax form. Schools, colleges, and universities, for the most part, prepare students to be employees. To a lesser extent, educational institutions prepare students to be S for self-employed when teaching a specialty occupation. Examples include doctors in private practice, accountants or architects that open their own firm and perhaps have an assistant or two. Self-employed folks control their own schedule and how they do the work, but there is no regular employer that must pay them even if they didn't make any money that week. Some of their clients are required to issue them tax form 1099 NEC, non-employee compensation, while others pay cash. Third-party payment processors, like credit cards or Cash App, issue tax form 1099-K. B is for big business owners. This is generally defined as having 500 or more employees. And while building something that big would be a huge accomplishment, the most important mindset difference between an S and a B is being comfortable with the people they hire doing the work. I is for investor. They let their money do the work. Investors might have a say on who's running the business, but they do not have a say or role in the day-to-day operations of the company. Tax forms they receive might include 1099 INT for interest, 1099 DIV for dividends, or 1099 MISC miscellaneous for things like rents paid for by the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Of course, this quadrant is an oversimplification, and many people make money in more than one quadrant. Decades ago, pensions were a common benefit by private employers, but that's been replaced by retirement plans like 401k or IRA, which is a form of investments. Pensions are still common for government jobs, many of which require U.S. citizenship. The choices you make will impact your spouse emotionally and vice versa. Y'all will either suffer or thrive emotionally, so this is important as well. The agenda of Robert Kiyosaki is to get people into the B and I side of the quadrant, but the first two chapters of Cash Flow Quadrant are neutral enough to be a vital source for understanding people. Overall, you also have to be comfortable working through change. There are over 1,000 legal implications of marriage, along with many social implications, and as the world changes, more things will be added or taken away, and you will have to adjust. One of the difficult things about marrying young is you might not know yourself well enough to really answer these questions. So, you have to know if you feel comfortable with change when it comes to you and your potential spouse. And of course, some people decide to be stay-at-home parents. So if there are all those problems and more, why is the marriage green card route so glorified? Here are the top reasons, and I think that you, as a valid F1 international student, will find some of these less relevant, but they are still advantages, so I want to give a balanced view. Spouses of U.S. citizens are considered immediately eligible for permanent residence, and the option is always available in that there is no waiting list, priority dates, or quotas. However, they are still requirements to be met, some of which I'll address, and others I will leave you to research for yourself. And of course, a lawyer can help you out. There is the perception that the marriage green card process is fast and easy. This is far from true, but the core requirement is one that many people want to do anyways. Build a life with somebody that they can be supportive in many ways. Some immigration violations are automatically forgiven, while some others, along with some minor crimes, are forgivable. Lastly, for many, this is the only option they qualify for. As I alluded to, there are many types of economic documents that you will be expected to submit with your adjustment of status application. These are to demonstrate that you are doing what I describe as a full merger, and many lawyers explain as building a life together. The U.S. government wants to make sure that people who are getting marriage-based green cards are doing so that they can live a life with their spouse in America. They will be looking to see that your bank accounts are joint, actively used as such, along with joint tax returns. You'll be expected to have each other as the beneficiary of any solo accounts each of you might have, like retirement 401ks or life insurance. You'll also be expected to have both names on any house or other property you get, or on a lease if renting. The addresses on both your state IDs will be the same, since the two most important requirements for someone to be eligible for permanent residence via marriage is living together and joining finances. A lawyer can guide you through figuring out what documents to send in, but you are educated and can research all the forms and make the decision to carefully take the time to fill them out yourself. Making an error can set you back several years, and all application fees are non-refundable. Other documents that couples would have are things like emergency contacts, and if you feel it is relevant to you, healthcare proxies. Sometimes American married couples try to get out of doing some of those things or delegate those to another family member, but your application simply won't get approved if you try to do that. There's a much higher threshold. Given how much memory is available on our phones, some documentation you can save now are photos together, especially with family, text messages, travel tickets, etc. Remember to have any document that you actually intend to use backed up in more than one place. Marriage is a lifelong commitment. The process of getting your immigration status completely secured is a multi-year process. Americans marry for love, with little meaning to the practical things that people in many other countries focus a lot on. They might say that they understand, how important the green card is, and they might think that it's almost entirely about that. But if they're an honest person, and following the rules and all of that, they are holding on to hope and dreams with you. If you are seeing this as some deal to get a green card or citizenship and then leaving your spouse, you will be hurting somebody big time, creating heartbreak, and making them feel their entire life has fallen apart. If you are planning to do that, that makes you a terrible person, and your example will make it even harder for immigrants and even international students who want a serious non-marriage relationship to get Americans to trust them. Simply put, that is fraud, a felony, that there's no coming back from this one. While not as morally bankrupt, getting somebody to agree to marry for the sole purpose of getting you an immigration benefit is fraud. Sometimes immigrants pay a U.S. citizen to do this for them. Other times, the American will do this to quote, to help a friend out. In either case, it's not allowed. Aside from submitting the paperwork and documents showing that you live together with your sworn signature, you most likely will have an in-person interview under oath at some point during the process. The plain truth is that if you do not want to fully and permanently build a life together with the person you are considering marrying, or to anybody in general, you don't qualify for the marriage green card route. Also, utilizing a non-immigrant visa to enter the U.S. with the intent to stay beyond the authorized activity is fraud. Your actions in the first few months after your most recent entry into the U.S. may be scrutinized, and if they are inconsistent with your visa, you could face accusation. And falsely claiming to be a U.S. citizen is a big no-no. You have worked way too hard to get to where you are now. Don't risk it all by committing fraud. Something to know is that in America, there is no shame in going to therapy if anything is stressing you out. What you talk about there is confidential, and they have ways of helping people to manage stress or see situations more clearly. Your campus health center should also have somebody or be able to at least point you in the right direction. Couples therapy is a great option when you are with somebody and y'all are trying to work through stuff. To have a healthy relationship, you're going to have to learn how to be open and honest in communicating and do that in a healthy way. Now that I have explained the types of proof you will need to send in with your application, here is an honest look at the timeline. Of course, your individual situations or the inefficiencies of government could make it much longer. And if everything is smooth, it could be a little faster. First, you have to meet all the requirements. The major ones are financial, clean enough criminal record, health, and beginning to join your lives. For that, along with compiling all the paperwork, I'm factoring in 6 to 12 months, but there is no deadline. Then, submit your application as an immediate relative of a U.S. citizen. A green card is, quote, always available, so you don't have to wait for a priority date, lottery cycle. Thus, you will be submitting all of the paperwork, including your proof of relationship and for the adjustment of status concurrently, along with work and travel permissions. Within 6 to 8 months, hopefully significantly faster, you will get that work permission to get a job in any field and the travel permission. So under this estimated timeline, the work permission will have arrived 1 year to 19 months after getting married. About 3 months after that, you should have had your interview or interview waiver and hopefully the approval of your conditional permanent residence. So in this estimation, you will have been married about 1.5 years before getting your initial green card. The condition is that in 2 years, you will be required to send in proof of your continued marriage. Once that is approved, your residence status will be fully permanent and the physical green card valid for 10 years. If you are having your citizenship interview before the removal of conditions is approved, they can approve it at that time. 3 years after getting your initial permanent resident status with proof of your continued marriage living together, you will be able to interview for citizenship if you apply as soon as allowed. You should hopefully have your swearing in ceremony a few weeks after that 3-year mark, perhaps a few months. If you and your spouse split before that whole process is over, depending on which step you were on, your status might be revoked or the timeline extended by several years. Congrats, you'll be 4 or 5 years into your marriage getting your US passport. The American spouse is the petitioner. The forms to fill out, and thus what the internet and lawyers point out as the first option, is for the petitioner to have sufficient individual income to meet the requirement. For those working a regular W-2 job, this concept makes sense. But the rest of us are left confused as to why immigration says to build everything as a married couple and then makes this split. So thankfully the forms have other options. The first is the petitioner and/or beneficiary showing sufficient assets with the relevant multiplier. If your family has the money to give you what you need to start life a step ahead the average person, perhaps for a well-funded house down payment, that's easy. Otherwise, of course, you can build up to that as well. Being smart with the money you make while on OPT is a good idea. A joint sponsor would have to be another US citizen or permanent resident. For self-employed folks and business owners, when both spouses are involved in the venture, there's not much difference between individual and joint incomes. Tax preparers usually have married couples split the income reporting 50% each, but your lawyer might advise you differently. Self-employed folks and business owners get to deduct many business expenses. However, the immigration income requirement is based on what is reported after taking those deductions. I have never heard of the medical exam requirement actually being a problem for somebody, so I'll skip over this. There are some YouTube videos that will explain more, but it's just one more thing to do, another fee to be paid. But if you are not caring for yourself or you do not have your vaccine records, it may slow the whole process down. Since the medical exam must be sealed when sent in, have the doctor give you a copy and review it yourself or with your lawyer for any errors. For some, the criminal background check does cause a problem. It is best, of course, to stay away from anybody who does things that they could get arrested for. You don't want to get swept up unfairly, and you certainly don't want to be doing crimes yourself. Remember, you are a guest in this country, and most of the people living carefree on the matter are citizens. But if you have been arrested in the USA or elsewhere, here is what you need to do and know. Documentation of any arrest and the outcome is a must. You certainly should consult a lawyer and probably hire it, because USCIS may come to their own decisions on the charge that was dismissed or expunged, so it's still a problem. A lawyer is also helpful because USCIS asks if you committed crimes and didn't get caught. Some crimes have an extreme hardship waiver. The hardship is to the US spouse is what is considered. They have to demonstrate that they would be worse off than most people would be if their spouse was not allowed to live with them in the US. Things like the petitioner having a disability or the country the immigrant spouse is from being on the US State Department Do Not Travel list help make a strong case. Things like the petitioner's children needing help make a weaker but probably winnable case, and a bunch of little hardships can add up to extreme hardship, so a good lawyer knows what they are doing. The most impressive advice I saw was having the petitioner get a mental health evaluation for the stress of the situation so don't give up before consulting several attorneys. There is also the middle ground where the immigration cannot give the green card, but the judge can dismiss the deportation case. But for the most serious stuff, ICE will deport the spouse of an American citizen. While immigration violations aren't typically treated as crimes, it is important to understand them and, for the most part, to the greatest extent, follow them. If you are married to a U.S. citizen, two violations that you won't need to worry about are overstaying your authorized presence or any work without authorization. However, leaving the United States once out of status would trigger a bar from re-entering the U.S. A waiver, advanced parole, or a green card fixes that problem, of course. That is because those two situations have an automatic forgiveness to them. Of course, not having work permission will prevent you from getting traditional jobs that actually check for these things, and you do run the very small chance of getting detained by ICE, but such cases are placed on hold because you're considered immediately eligible for permanent residence. At that point, y'all really need to just figure out how to meet all the requirements so that USCIS can award you the green card. Like I said, very unlikely, but possible, especially depending on what state you live in. Based on those clauses, though, that's why it's more important to make sure you're filling out the paperwork correctly. Make sure to take time to do that. That's more important than like rushing, to meet some 12 midnight deadline or whatever. And those clauses are also why the green card marriage route is so glorified compared to the other options that might be available to some. Did you know that spouses of U.S. permanent residents, green card holders, can also petition for their spouse? Once their application is received, USCIS will send them a receipt notice with their priority date, meaning the day the application was put in the line. Similar to applications for employment-based green cards, the priority date must become current, meaning that applications submitted on that day for that category are now being accepted to get a green card. These dates may also differ by country of birth. In July 2024, spouses of U.S. green card holders whose priority dates are on or before November 1st, 2023, born anywhere in the world can now apply for adjustment of status, but for August 2024, priority dates up to June 15th, 2024 can proceed. The U.S. State Department publishes the Visa Bulletin monthly, and due to the way things are estimated, sometimes the list goes into retrograde, so if you have an application requiring your priority date to be current, check each month and be ready to submit the adjustment of status. Spouses of permanent residents cannot have immigration violations to qualify. As mentioned, spouses of U.S. citizens are not subject to the priority date system if a permanent resident that applied for their spouse becomes a U.S. citizen. They can upgrade the application to spouse of a U.S. citizen. Another option for those focused on becoming among the best in their field is the Extraordinary Talent Green Card. Many universities send students to and host regional, national, or international conferences to present their research or hold competitions, and studying abroad from the perspective of the institution you are currently at is a great way to build your connections and reputation in what would be for you a third country. USCIS officer reviewing the application is looking for the information and referrals to show why you are at the top level globally. Did you know that people can enter the green card lottery from inside the US. People born in countries with low rates of immigration, as determined each year, can apply every year. Millions apply, and only 55,000 people, quote, win, and not all are picked in time. The deadline to be approved and entered or already be in the USA is strict, and circumstances beyond people's control or restrictions caused by the government cannot get extensions. In 2021, once President Trump was out of office and COVID was becoming managed, it became clear that Congress would have to change the law to accommodate the winners who didn't get it in time. Marriage is a beautiful thing, but it is hard work, teamwork. You will have arguments and you're going to have to compromise, and you probably don't have the upper hand if you feel that you need to make the marriage work, but you don't have to put up with abuse. For immigrants who are victims of serious abuse, physically or verbal, women and men, there is a special application process to apply for permanent residence without their spouse. It does not require a police report, so your spouse won't get arrested as a result of your application or get a bad mark on their background check. Remember, speaking with a lawyer is also confidential, so you can evaluate if this option will work for you, and you have to protect yourself. While your US spouse cannot call anybody and get you deported, they can withdraw themselves from your case and give their reasons that might come up in the future and or file a divorce. If you are at serious risk due to a domestic violence situation, leave. First of all, a green card is useless if you're dead. There are domestic violence shelters you can turn to. Also, get food and other essentials there. There are also volunteer lawyers that can help you. Every time somebody dies from domestic violence, the police find out the situation escalated over time. Overall, I believe marriage is a beautiful thing, and the data is clear that married couples do better economically than single folks. If you take a deep breath and ask yourself, why do I want a green card? And I think you will come to the answers you need to make the right decision. Living in America means something to you and is an experience for everybody here, and most people want to have that experience with somebody at their side. For accessibility reasons, I made sure all the words that were on the screen were in my dialogue. In this last slide, there is an image like splattered paint, and I typed the words, "Don't assume, communicate. Best of wishes for your marriage and life together in USA." Hopefully this video sparks a dialogue, and I put some things of my personal opinion and dreams. But I did balance it with topics that don't concern me, but concern a lot of people that I think should be thought about. I think that anybody considering marriage, especially when immigration is a factor, will have found this video helpful. But there are some things tailored to international students that won't apply to others. I saw a lot of videos on the process of getting a green card and then citizenship via marriage to a US citizen, but I didn't see anybody talking about the bigger picture of what it all means. Best in Pursuits, Abu. This is just my second video on this channel, so I'll just give a little peek of what I'm looking at doing going forward on this, of course. And still figuring out the tech on it. I don't know, it sort of looked like maybe my mouth didn't line up with what I was saying. I'm not sure, but anyway. This channel is geared to real estate investors and entrepreneurs looking to invest or be in New York City or elsewhere in America. I talk quite a bit about government benefits and being the receiver of those is often limited to U.S. citizens, but being the service provider can be an international person or legal permanent resident or a company. For example, there is no rule against foreigners being a landlord who accepts a Section 8 voucher, but there are restrictions against non-citizens from being the tenant utilizing the voucher. The opportunities I present I think will be especially fitting for international folks, and in general, they are entrepreneurs at higher rates than USA-born citizens. These videos are not meant to include everything that you need to know before applying any business or personal decisions, and you do need to check the immigration requirements if that's relevant. See, my vision is that immigrants prosper here in USA.